What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Sheehan Show here on Sherdog.com, and I'm absolutely delighted today to be joined by the Cage Warriors play-by-play supremo, media guy, all-round great guy, Brad Wharton, to preview Cage Warriors 150 over in London. It's the, I was going to say, maybe not the first, but one in a series of great Cage Warriors cards coming up. Obviously, they're coming back to Ireland very soon. The Rome card. Lots of massive cards and fights coming up, and we're here to preview Cage Warriors 150. Brad, how are you? I know it's been a long few weeks for you. You've been over in San Diego and lots of different cards since the New Year. How's everything? How's everything been?
It's been a bit of a week, Sean. I'm not going to lie. I dropped my headphones and my cup of tea yesterday. Brushed my teeth with warm water. The jet lag is real. It was actually my first ever visit to America. I went to Cuba when I was a kid and landed in Boston for 10 minutes, but it's my first actual time spending time in America. And I just about got used to the time difference by the time I had to come home. And then I stupidly stayed awake on the flight all the way back because they had super fast Wi-Fi, so I could watch the John Jones fight overnight. But then, I've been ruined all week. So I'm just about with it again now, I think. But yeah, great experience. Lived in a casino for a week. Who doesn't want to do that? Considerably poorer than when I
that's probably the reason why you would.
Them's the breaks, right?
That's
when you're throwing down $100 chips on the roulette wheel, you're gonna have a bad time.
But at least you're getting paid to be out there anyway. Most people are paying, coming back with absolutely nothing. Maybe you come back with the same of what you left with, which is a plus, I suppose. Maybe a little bit less. But it's interesting. Obviously funny you say dropping your headphones. I remember. I was at one of I think it was a Bellator media day, and we did all the interviews and all. It was out in a hotel out near the airport, and we were like, okay, we'll throw up the videos to be uploaded. We said, you know what, we'll have a pint here while they're uploading before we head away home. And I put in I bought these Beats earphones. They were the stupidest thing I ever bought, like the in-ear ones, like the small ones. So I was listening to the video, and I was like, right, click upload, and then I threw one out. And then I was just like talking about it, and then looked down, and one half of the Beats earphone was inside my pint, just like halfway through the buy. I'm like, okay, I spent like 150 quid on these small earphones that you'd pay a $5 for below fucking Sintra, and now they're absolutely ruined. Although I actually think I have them like around here. Some of them are still working anyway, so that's not too bad. But they had to be putting a hot press or something for about a week after that. But yeah, these are the breaks.
Thankfully, the ones that I dropped in my tea yesterday were a pair of I think they were about 15 quid little Sony earbuds. If I dropped these in my tea, I wouldn't be doing this podcast now because I'd still be crying.
I've done things like that, yeah. Oh, it's the worst, isn't it? It's not too bad when it's although them little Sony ones are good too. I've a pair of them. They're the 15 quid ones.
They do the trick, don't they? They do the trick.
Right, we better get into this card so we could talk about fucking dropping stuff in pints all day. I know the two of us definitely could without the shadow of a doubt. But it's a very interesting card, this one. Obviously, there's two cards in 2 weeks, and we'll be back next week with a preview for the Unplugged card as well. But the Cage Warriors 150 card, I heard about Jordan Vuvenic. This is kind of his comeback card, I suppose. That's the headline. But I looked down through the card, and there's some absolute bangers on this. And one thing I must say about it, I feel like this is Ian Dean's way of finding who the next guy at 145 is going to be, just almost this whole card, because like what's going to happen with Paul Hughes, maybe by the time this comes out we might know already, like, is he going to be on a UFC card, is he going to be on the Cage Warriors Irish card? I think everyone kind of thinks he's going to the UFC at the moment, but we don't know. But we have Vuvenic obviously coming back here. We were supposed to have the Harry Hardwick fight. Obviously, that's not happening now. But we have Charriere versus Hendin as well. It's going to be decided, really, isn't it? Maybe not decide who the next champion is, but who the next challenger is, or who the next pair of challengers might be for a vacant belt. And that's probably the headline of this card, isn't it? And a big interest coming into this to see, like, probably I would say the most vaunted Cage Warriors belt, the 145-pound belt. The list of champions that have been there at that have been absolutely phenomenal. So it's a big night for that alone, Brad, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. There's been periods over the last few years where the welterweight title's been the one to go for, when Nicholas Dalby was coming back and there was just a merry-go-round of champions. Same with the lightweight belt. But yeah, I kind of agree with you at the moment that the featherweight division, there's so many guys who could be that next guy, if James Hendin goes in there and knocks out Morgan Charriere, he's the man. If Morgan Charriere submits James Hendin, he's the man. You know, you've got Harilla and Shelley in a couple of months in Dublin. Any of those guys get a signature win, and they could be fighting for the title. And of course, as you say, in the main event, we've got Jordan Vucenic taking on Tiziano Ferranti. And look, this is an incredible fight. You know, it's a comeback fight for Jordan. It's, you know, Jordan's in a position now where he can't lose fights anymore, right? I mean, there was no shame in losing to Paul Hughes. I don't think there's a featherweight outside of the UFC and maybe even in the UFC as well that was going to beat Paul Hughes on that night last November. But Jordan Vucenic, you know, for me, one of the most technically astute guys in the division, in the whole of Cage Warriors. And as we saw in that fight with Paul Hughes, just built from different stuff. You know, if he wanted out of that fight, he could have got out of that fight in the second round, the third round, the fourth round, the fifth round. He stayed in and he went into that fifth round knowing that he was so far behind on the scorecards, and he was still fighting to the last breath in that fight. And not many people are made of that stern stuff. He's an absolute danger to anyone on his day. And, you know, he talked about before this fight, if he didn't beat Paul Hughes, maybe he'd be stepping away from the sport. But whatever it was after the fight that clicked, something happened, and he wanted to get straight back in there, and he wanted to go in there and fight a tough guy. And he's got a guy, you know, it's another Ian Dean special. It's a guy that, you know, people outside of the Italian scene haven't seen a lot of. He had a very successful amateur career, had some, you know, good fights at amateur, and the guy's a finisher. You know, he can crack, he can bang, he can finish fights on the ground as well. And, you know, crucially for me, there's a big difference here between these two guys in terms of the amount of pressure they're going to be feeling going in. Because if Ferranti loses to Jordan Vucenic in his sixth pro fight, who cares? Do you know what I mean? Cage Warriors are going to Italy 4 times this year. He's going to get another fight. He's going to get another opportunity to prove himself. And, you know, there's going to be a lot of guys that lose to Jordan Vucenic before he's finished in the sport. But if Vucenic doesn't pull it off here, it's huge. It's huge for him. It's going to change the direction of his career, I would imagine. So, yes, he may be the more experienced guy. He may be the guy who goes in as the bookmaker's favorite, but he's going to have a lot of pressure on his shoulders. And that can obviously play a huge part in any fight.
Yeah, I think there's a lot on the line here for Vucenic. Not only, you know, we talked about the title, we talked about the pressure, but also it's not that far away from that Paul Hughes fight. The amount of damage he took in that fight to be, you know, bouncing back like this. And, you know, I watched Ferranti, and I know you have as well. That guy, as you said, he can crack really, really hard. You know, he takes 1 or 2 of them in the first round, and we'll see, like, how much he has recovered. Like, I think Vucenic probably proved something in that fight that a lot of human beings aren't able to prove, and how tough he actually is. And I think we knew before that fight, but in maybe the first couple of rounds of that fight as well, that Jordan Vucenic is high enough quality to, you know, be a Cage Warriors champion, obviously, as he was, but get to the UFC as well. Like, I still believe that. But like some people, it takes a while for them to recover from fights like that. Say, look at like an Anthony Pettis against Dos Anjos or other people as well. So I think that's probably the biggest thing coming in here for Vucenic. And you look at the other side for Ferranti, and as I said, I watched him. He's an interesting guy because, like, Jordan Vucenic fought more in his last fight than Ferranti has fought in his whole pro career. I think he's only around 18 minutes-ish, and obviously Jordan Vucenic at 25 last time out. So that's, I know it's, you know, 5 fights versus 11 fights, not the biggest difference there, but the amount of actual fight time and the quality as well. But, you know, few with 11 fights have fought the quality of that Vucenic has. That's a big part of this as well. But as you said, an Ian Dean special, rarely
here's the interesting thing though, Sean. You know, a lot of people said about Caelan Loughran when he came into Cage Warriors, well, you know, has he fought a massive amount outside of Cage Warriors? Has he fought the quality of opposition outside of Cage Warriors? The answer was no, but he turns up and he's beaten everybody. You know, to beat a guy like Festus Orholu, hugely talented prospect, the way that he did, and then to come in and beat Luke Shanks the way that he did, a former Cage Warriors champion. No one's doubting Caelan Loughran now. Everyone knows how good he is. This could be Ferranti's time to do a similar thing. There's a lot on the line here, and I think it's going to lead to an incredible atmosphere. You know, Jordan always brings a huge crowd with him, and from what I've seen, he's bringing a huge crowd again. There's a lot of pressure on his shoulders. Ferranti, no pressure on his shoulders. everything to play for here. I think it's going to be potentially one of those classic Cage Warriors fights. I don't think we see the judges' scorecards here. I think one of these guys is going to finish it. Obviously, not. I can't and don't want to make a prediction on who that will be, but I think this is going to be fast and furious because I think both guys are going to have a huge point to prove. Vuvenic needs to prove that he's still the man. Ferranti can tip the entire division on its head if he gets a win here.
Yeah, it's a very interesting fight. Like, I look at Ferranti and I just see a guy with like ungodly power that's learning the game, kind of, you know. And as you say, he loses this fight. What difference does it actually make in 5 fights' time? If you put it all together, he looks a bit green, obviously, as anyone would 18 minutes into their career. You don't look green anymore. You have that big power, and that's a kind of a game changer. And fighting against a guy like Vuvenic, win or lose, is going to bring him on. So it's interesting. And you look for Vuvenic, that power is a test alone. So, I think it's one of those fights. If it goes to decision, I think it'll probably favour Vuvenic. Either guy could finish it, but if it's early, I think it'll probably favour Ferranti just because of that power. But it's a very, very interesting fight, and one I'm massively looking forward to. I think a big part of it as well is that it's the night before the UFC. There'll be a good crowd there. There's always a raucous crowd because there's kind of lads in there and they're like, right, we're going to get on the beer now tonight. We'll be on it at 2 p.m. again tomorrow, and we'll get on it all day for the UFC. And they're mad for that main event, and they absolutely love it. And Vuvenic is used to that. He said that. What has he said? At least once or twice now at this stage anyway. And I remember the last time and the time before, he was really like taking his time, kind of drinking it all in. Ferranti will have never faced anything like that. I know he fought in Bellator, I think, was it? In one of those big cards. So maybe a little bit, but nothing, I don't think, like that, especially with Vuvenic with the hometown crowd behind him. So I think it's a very, very interesting fight, and one I'm definitely looking forward to. We'll stick to the 145-pound division while we're talking about, and talk about Morgan Charriere versus James Hendin. Like, you look at the 7-2 on James Hendin's record, and who are the two? Vuvenic and Hughes, the two guys that have been there for the last 3 or 4 years now at this stage, nearly in Cage Warriors at the top of the division. And you look at Charriere, the only two guys he's lost to in the last 4 or 5 years have been Hughes and Vuvenic as well. And the only one before that for another couple of years was Sorenbach, who was the champion in Cage Warriors as well at one stage. So he's not losing to anyone bad or anything like that. I think it's a massive fight because, look, we all know Cage Warriors have invested a lot in Charriere. He is a big star over in France, and he was supposed to fight Albert Diaz last time. That fight fell through. He got another fight in short notice against a guy who thought, he's going to walk through him. It was a close split decision, but I don't know. Charriere seems to me like a star. He rises when the lights are brightest, and I feel like this is an occasion when that is there as well. Everyone, like, people mightn't understand how good James Hendin is or appreciate what type of a fighter he is, but I guarantee you Charriere will, because he's been following Cage Warriors and watching all of these fights he's had over the last while, and I think it's a very interesting fight because I think Charriere, he can hit hard. He's a good technical fighter and all of that. But when a guy like Hendin's coming out there and getting in his face, pushing him against the cage, landing shots, maybe trying to get a few takedowns, that's kind of that's when the fly meets the windscreen type of job, and who's going to win there? It's an interesting one, Brad. How do you see this one? Now, obviously, I don't want you to give a winner or anything like that, but how do you see this one going once they close the door?
Like you say, it's a really, really intriguing contest because I think both of these guys are what I would call big match players. They step up when the occasion calls for it, and we've seen that with Morgan Charriere. Big fights against Dean Truman and Perry Goodwin. Some incredible finishes there. And as you said a few months ago, his fights against Paul Hughes, Jordan Vuvenic, and then going back a few years to Sorenbach. I mean, if any of those fights had gone the other way, I don't think we could really complain massively. I think it was 2 majority decisions and 1 split, on a different night with different judges. Morgan Charriere is a Cage Warriors world champion with 7 title defenses behind him. That's in the reality how close those fights were. James Hendin, phenomenally talented guy, had a really close fight with Paul Hughes as well. Heavy-handed, a good wrestler, a judo background, which makes him very effective up against the cage and in the clinch. I think these two guys are going to bring out the best in each other. And I think where we talked about the situation in the main event where you've got one guy with the weight of the world on his shoulders and one guy without. Well, here there's two guys who've got a lot of pressure on them because, Hendin's still young in his career, but having lost to Hughes and having lost to Vuvenic, got to get the wins now. He's got to start racking the wins up, and it's the same with Morgan. Obviously, everyone's seen the Cage Warriors schedule that we released. We've got a date at some point in France this year. It's not locked down exactly when it's going to be. This has been Morgan Charriere's dream for a few years now. He wants to headline a Cage Warriors event in France, and he wants to do so defending or fighting for a world title. So he's got to win this fight to be in that position by the end of the year. If he doesn't win here, he's probably not going to be fighting for a title on that card in France. So there's huge stakes in this fight. And when you've got a veteran like Morgan, who's been in those big fights before, who's been in those main events, he's a big game player. He's going to bring it. We saw that phenomenal fight with Paul Hughes. And my favorite thing about that fight was the fans. You had all the fans from France on one side, all the fans from Ireland on the other side, absolutely tearing lumps into each other for 25 minutes. Well, probably 45 minutes with the walkouts because they both took their sweet time. But by the end of the fight, both fans were applauding each other. Absolutely phenomenal moment. But it's the kind of moment that tells me that Morgan Charriere can step up when he needs to. And we know James Hendin can as well. The better the opponent he fights, the better the performance we see out of him. So I'm really looking forward to this one. Even if I could give you a prediction, this is a fight I'm not putting money on. I'm not betting on this fight because I genuinely can't call it.
Yeah, I might have to bet in it, but you could tune into the betting. You could tune into the betting shop for that. It's a big opportunity as well. With Harry Hardwick out of that fight that he was supposed to have here, I think that was supposed to be the co-main event, wasn't it? And that was a big spot for him and a big one. With his brother as the champion as well. So that's unlucky on Harry, but good, that's a look for both Hendin and Charriere. I think if one of them win it, obviously with Vuvenic as well in there, there's a big opportunity for them. So that 145-pound merry-go-round is going to come to a bit of a halt before it gets going again here very, very soon. One fight, that sticks out on this card is Jamie Richardson versus Justin Burlinson. Burlinson versus Rhys McKee. Is it the best fight in Cage Warriors history? It must be up there. What a fight! It's one of those fights. I came to do the end of the year awards last year over in Severe Man. I was kind of thinking we need an Irish MMA fight of the year because this should have won an award. It was such a good fight. And, okay, Rhys McKee came out the victor on that night, but we can't forget the part Justin Burlinson played in as well. And we'll obviously talk a lot about Rhys coming up, headlining the massive 3 Arena card coming up. But for Justin Burlinson, he was winning a large part of that fight. He showed his level. Obviously, he had, I suppose, the cup of coffee with the UFC. It didn't happen. And now he's coming back here against Jamie Richardson, a guy who's been around and fought some of the best in Cage Warriors over the last few years. To me, all I can see here is another Rock'em Sock'em Robots type of fight. I wonder who can change that up and who can make it, maybe take it on their side and make it more of a one-sided fight. Maybe Burlinson, considering maybe the level he's gotten to, but I don't know. That doesn't seem in his nature either, does it? He loves to have an old scrap, and I think this will be exactly that.
What people always forget with Burlinson is that he's an absolutely phenomenal grappler. He really, really is talented in that facet of the game. He might be better at that than anything else, but he's just one of those guys who's never got into a fist fight that he didn't enjoy. And as soon as the fists start flying and the elbows and knees start flying, he's all for it. And that's exactly what we saw against Rhys McKee. Best fight in Cage Warriors history, maybe. Certainly one of the best ones I've called. I struggle to think, maybe Joe McColgan versus Mehdi Ben Lakhdar is up there, but, that big arena, the atmosphere, the drama, and the fact that Rhys was looking like he was maybe about to be out of that fight and the way he came back and the violent nature in which he finished it. Yeah, it might well be the best fight in Cage Warriors history. And you can't discount Justin Burlinson's part in that just because he wasn't victorious on the night. The guy's tough as nails wherever the fight goes. But then so is Jamie Richardson. He's a guy who obviously fought for the Cage Warriors middleweight title against Matthias Frederick a few years ago. And, he was stopped in the 3rd round, but the first 2 rounds he was winning. And he was beating Matthias in those first 2 rounds in a way that no one else has really been able to do. You look at Matt Bonner, who beat Matthias for the title. And that was a wild brawl that, it was just helter-skelter. It was all over the place. Jamie Richardson was methodical, and he beat Matthias well. He used his jab, used his boxing very well for the first 2 rounds, and just looked phenomenal. So he's a guy who knows how to win fights. And again, he's a good wrestler. He's good on the ground, but just loves to get into a punch-up. I think if these two guys really went in there and really focused on a certain game plan, either one of them could potentially dominate this fight. But what we know about these guys is that after a while, they're going to start punching each other. And when that happens, all bets are off. It's what I like to call the value for money fight. You drop your 50 quid or whatever it is on a ticket, and you see these two names fighting each other or fighting anyone else, you're going to have a good time. And it's one of the ones that I'm most looking forward to calling, because I just know it's going to be chaos.
Yeah, it's a great fight. Over and under as well, it's kind of Team KF on tour with Omran Chaaban fighting Mush Alsani and James Webb fighting Alan Carlos. And I would be probably certain that both of these lads will be hoping to get wins and get on the Dublin card if possible. Now maybe that isn't possible, because I know there's a lot of names on that, but it's very interesting the kind of the place Team KF have taken in Cage Warriors. Obviously, we know what's happened with SPG and all, and they've, taken themselves out of being in Cage Warriors and all that, and there was, a spot there to be taken for Dublin fighters, I suppose, coming through. And, okay, James Webb, you wouldn't call him a Dublin fighter, I suppose, but he trains out of Dublin a lot of the time, and we look at the two Shelley brothers coming up in, Harilla and Dean Barry, two of the most fun fights we're going to see on that Cage Warriors Dublin card. But these fights coming up here, the Mush Alsani fight for Omran Chaaban, watching a couple of Mush's fights, we look at the Adam Darby fight, absolute power, but on the ground maybe issues there, whereas Omran has showed, he's very good striking, but his last fight, few takedowns, showed he's better on the ground. And in James Webb against Alan Carlos, this is just your kind of old-fashioned, again, two lads going to try to punch each other really hard, both lads probably going to try to take it to the ground, both lads probably going to try to submit each other. One of those fights, and as well a big fight at 185, because James Webb, no matter where he is, he's never too far away, and looked absolutely phenomenal physically, technically, mentally, and every way in his last fight. Big weekend as well for Team KF, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. There's clearly something special going on with that gym at the moment. You've got the Shelleys, you've got the likes of Taka Mandu, you've got Omran, you've got Leon Hill as well, and they're training under a former Cage Warriors world champion in Chris Fields. They're training under Tom King, one of the best BJJ black belts in Europe. They've got guys like Carl Pendred, former Cage Warriors welterweight champion. These guys are all very experienced at the top end of the game, and they're passing that knowledge on now. And it's that kind of situation where you've got a lot of guys kind of coming up at the same time. They're all learning from each other. They're all bouncing off each other. James Webb obviously spending a lot of time training over there as well. I believe he's the team captain, right? He's the Team KF team captain, or at least he was at one point. It seems like a great group they've got there. They're all very focused. They're all seemingly like-minded individuals. They all seem to be bonding very well. And like you're seeing with teams like Next Gen at the moment. When one guy has a big win, it kind of raises the whole team up. A rising tide lifts all ships kind of thing. But they got some tough fights. Mush Alsani's no joke. He's had a bit of maybe a consistency problem, perhaps. But when you see those flashes of brilliance from him, you see that power. Is a dangerous guy that you can't underestimate. And as I'm sure we'll talk about at some point in the next few weeks, some big fights for the Team KF guys on that Dublin card as well. It could be a great night for Dublin fans, or it might not be. But this is the thing with Cage Warriors, man. There's few easy fights out there, and you've got to respect these guys for taking these fights in their hometown that are tough fights and could potentially go either way.
100%. The rest of the card then is. There's, some very good, the prospects coming up, like Nick Bagley, likes Jack Elgin and others as well. But there's a couple of fights that stand out for me, and a couple of prospects. Well, I'm going to give you one prospect and one fight, and then you can tell me what you're looking forward to after that. Lanier Kavanagh is the guy that I know. My guy Ian O'Neill interviewed him, and I was watching a bit. I'm like, this guy, he just looks special. You know, at 4-0, the corner that he has behind him, the physique he has, he just looks like a special prospect coming up fighting another 4-0 again, 4-0 guy in Davide, Scarano coming up here. But the fight I'm looking forward to is Omeil Brown versus Daniel Skibinski. Oh, what a banger this is.
I knew you were going to say that one. I've been waiting to talk to you about this all day, my friend. My goodness.
I have a soft spot for Omeil. I have a soft spot for Skibinski. Like, Skibinski's one of those guys who came into Cage Warriors, and I watched a good bit of him before that. That first fight before he came in and fought. It was Justin Burlinson, wasn't it? I was like, oh, this guy is good. And then he comes in. He's not had the best time of it in Cage Warriors. What is it? 2 losses, and then the Oban Elliott fight didn't end up happening. He's due a big window. He absolutely is an Omeil Brown. Like, what a fighter he is. Like, I was watching he fight Junior Horalu, who was fighting Norman Park. So I interviewed Norman Park. I went back and watched that fight, and I was like, oh, Omeil Brown is a good fighter. And then I saw he's on this card. So I got even more excited. So this is just fun written all over, really, doesn't it? What a fight this is.
Yeah, I mean, Omeil's one of those guys that I really enjoyed watching in the pandemic era, in the empty arenas, because when this guy hits, he hits hard. Like, and to be frank, even when he's fought back in front of crowds as well, I know it's a cliche, but people say, oh, this guy hits different. This guy really does hit different. He's got absolutely ridiculous power. Skibinski is just made of granite. We've seen that guy take some absolutely massive shots and stay in the fight. He's a wild man as well. Both these guys can grapple too. You look at Omeil Brown's early wins, he was guillotining people. And Skibinski can go on the ground too. This is another fight. If you put a dartboard on the wall with every possible fight outcome, you could just blindfold yourself, chuck a dart, and you've got as much chance of getting it right as you have by analysing all the form and all the results and everything else. It's just mayhem. I think this is going to be one of the most entertaining fights of the night. I'm not really sure how it could be boring, to be perfectly honest. I don't think either of these guys have got a boring fight in them. And yeah, I just can't wait for this one. This is I knew you want to talk about this one because we've talked about Omeil Brown a couple of times before, and yeah, man, these two guys, absolute madmen. Can't wait.
There's a couple of favourites you always see on a Cage Warriors card, and you look down through the card, see are they there, and like, oh, and they are. It's like, yeah, that's Maniac Band is another one of mine. Anytime Maniac Band on a card, I watch.
Omeil Brown, like, couple of fights away from a title fight, maybe.
Could be.
Big knockout here. Big win in the middle of the year. Could he fight for a title by November, December? Yeah, absolutely. This guy's got a lot of potential. Training out of Team Renegade, and they're obviously on a huge high at the moment. You've got the Edwards brothers doing great things. Tom Brees heading that team up. He's got a good group of people behind him. Jai Herbert, of course, as well. Is going to be fighting next weekend. And as we talked about with Team KF, when you've got a lot of guys all on tears, the atmosphere in that gym is going to be incredible, and there's going to be some good rounds going on there. So yeah, Omeil Brown one to watch for me.
100%. Right, Brad, we'll leave it there for this card. A very, very interesting card. I can't wait for it. The £145 title winner next to 9 could be up for grabs. At 185 as well with Webb and Carlos. You never know who's going to be next there. And as you said, 170 even possibly as well. Burlinson Richardson is another one there, as well as the Omeil Brown fight. You just never know who's going to be next to 9 there. So it's a big night for Cage Warriors, and I'm looking forward to hearing you on the mic, and I'm looking forward to watching all the fights as well. Brad, thank you very much for joining me today, and thank you to everybody for listening. My name is Sheehan for Sherdog.com, and I'll see you all next time.